capital city Cherokee community. So I asked her if she'd be willing to speak to us today, and she agreed. So we're very happy to have Kathie with us, and we'll turn it over to you. And I assume you want to share your screen for your PowerPoint.
I will share my screen.
And so I'll turn it over to you and Andy.
Great, thank you. I feel like I'm talking to the choir here. A number of you are relatives of mine, and others are people whom I've admired for years and used your work and research. But I did this presentation for my Cherokee community because I'm on a couple of genealogy sites, and one of the questions that we get a lot is, were my ancestors actually on the Trail of Tears? That's information, I think, because of the trauma that people didn't necessarily pass that on. And so that's a question people have. So I little presentation just to show people some of what's available. So I'll see if I can share my screen here. We did this before and it worked.
If you move your mouse, there you go. You got it.
Okay. Can we see the screen? Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So the term actually that's used for the Cherokee who came after 1835 is emigrant Cherokee. I need to make you folks go away if I can figure out how to do that.
In your upper right-hand corner, you should have something that says view.
Now I can see my whole screen.
There you go. Perfect.
Where do we begin searching for these folks and who actually is an emigrant Cherokee? And interestingly, I'm old and my grandfather was born in 1867. So it's actually my great grandparents who were the emigrant Cherokee in my family, which is unusual. Most people have more generations in between. And actually neither of my great grandparents was on the Trail of Tears, although they both emigrated to Indian Territory in that time period. So the 1835 census is the starting point. And anyone who's on that census is considered an emigrant Cherokee. And I think that confuses a lot of people because they think that the 1835 census, they see things that it's called the Trail of Tears census. Jim Tyner's version of it, he called it Those Who Cried. So there's a lot of assumptions that that is in fact some sort of a muster roll or roster of the people on the Trail of Tears, and that's not correct at all. It's a census of the people who lived in the Cherokee Nation in the East in 1835. And anyone who went to Indian Territory before that census is considered an old settler, even though many of those people went in 1834. So not really much sooner, but they did remove in a different way. And of course, not everyone who was on that 1835 census was on the Trail of Tears. A lot of people, including some of my ancestors, self-removed. And then there are about the 1,500 people who didn't go at all, who stayed and managed to either avoid removal in North Carolina or simply stayed on their reserved land in the other states. The 1835 census also is misleadingly called the Henderson Roll, which confuses people. And that's because the guy in Tennessee, who was the census taker, was named Henderson. So it's an estimate that about 85 to 90% of the people that are on that 1835 census actually were removed, were Trail of Tears participants. Again, there are about a little over 16,000 people, plus intermarried whites and enslaved people who were also enumerated on that roll. This is an image of the original census. The those who've transcribed it, I can't thank them enough because I find huge portions of it to be basically illegible. And talking about enslaved people, sadly, many of the people who enslaved people in the East brought those people with them to Indian Territory on the Trail of Tears, which is, it's just doubly horrible. The first time those people were enumerated after they got to Indian Territory was on the 1860 US Census. And people generally believe that the 1860 census did not include Indian Territory, but in fact, it did. It included white people. The regular part of the census included white people who lived in Indian Territory. And the slave schedules included both white and Indian people. So the first person on this image is my second great grandfather, James Thompson. He was white. So he appears on the actual census itself. But if you look down at the bottom, Sabra Van and Sabra Bell, who were both relatives, were widowed Cherokee women. So they are on this census as well. This doesn't really speak to whether they were on the Trail of Tears or not, but it's a record that lets you find some of these people. The Tompkins roll was the 1867 census. I think it was taken in response to that Treaty of 1866. And it was the first roll that included the names of Black people in Indian Territory. Like the 1835 census, it's almost impossible to read. And just here to see my second great grandfather, James Thompson, is on the 1835 census as an intermarried white. And we saw him on the 1860 census, but his wife and children are the ones who appear on the Drennan roll. And of course, they don't appear by name on either the 1860 census or the 1835 roll. But at the same time, by correlating all three of these documents, you can sometimes put together a family record. And then, of course, we've got the Eastern applications, which provide all kinds of information if you've worked with those at all. It's interesting that clearly many people believe they would get paid for anybody who was Cherokee that they were related to who was dead. So they listed aunts, uncles. I think sometimes they listed the neighbors and the neighbor's dog. But it's wonderful that they did that because we get mountains of information from those Miller applications for the people who filed them. And all of the people who are considered immigrant Cherokee were eligible for the Guy and Miller payment. They didn't all apply, most of them did, but they were all eligible. And just as a side note, many old settlers applied as well. So even though they were rejected, we have all the information from their applications. All right, why am I not getting a, there we go. So 1835 valuations have been transcribed in a number of books. I don't think there is a single source that lists them all, and they're all in somewhat different formats. So again, you can search multiple places and then correlate what you see. And it doesn't really tell you that someone was on the Trail of Tears or not, but it tells you about, gives you information about your family that you might not have had before. I've found interestingly that the valuations which were conducted by white people on behalf of the government are often show that the people owned much less than they actually claimed themselves when they filed their own claims. So that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of books. I just posted some examples here. The Cherokee Footprints books have transcribed a lot of these valuations, and there's a lot of notes that are in there that help you to know who was related to whom. You can place people, you can correlate this with the census and see where people lived. And the Cherokee Footprints books have a lot of maps in them, which are nice because you can actually find the location, in many cases, the exact location where your family lived. These are the wonderful 1838 claims that have just recently been added to a database on the Trail of Tears Association site, which is wonderful. So these are people that we know. If you find one of these, then you know absolutely that your ancestor was on the Trail of Tears. This is proof positive because they were in a camp waiting to be removed when they filled this out. There are only 4.5 muster rolls that remain from the Trail of Tears. 4 of them are digitized at the Gilcrease in Tulsa. A partial one for the Moses Daniel detachment is in the National Archives. And I think I've seen it transcribed, but I don't remember where, so that's not terribly helpful, but it does exist. The Colston detachment, the Gilcrease has a payment roll from that, which isn't very long. This is a part of the page, but it does list quite a few names. So it's not a muster roll, but it has the same effect. And then, of course, there's the journals and the diaries that people kept. Buttrick's journal names lists quite a few names. Cannon and Dees wrote accounts of their journeys, but they weren't as interested in the people, apparently, where that was Daniel Buttrick's main interest. So you find many fewer names in their journals, but they're still a useful source. And then we have the claims for transportation and subsistence, because the government promised to pay, that's the US government, in order to encourage people to move to Indian Territory, said that they would pay for their transportation and then they would provide subsistence in the form of food or money for the first year that they were there. So there are microfilms that show who got paid subsistence. And again, that tells you that that person was in fact on the Trail of Tears. It's generally the head of household who got the payment, so we don't know about their wives and children, but it's another piece of information. And then we have the wonderful 1842 claims, thanks to Mary Bell, who's amazing, as we all know. And these are the claims that people made after they settled in Indian Territory for the losses that they had incurred, their property that had been taken from them. And we learned at the Trail of Tears meeting that these are going to be added to that database with the 1838 claims. Many of them are digitized in multiple places already, but have a single site will be wonderful. And again, proof positive that your ancestor was in fact on the Trail of Tears. And I just thought this was interesting because this particular claim, she actually said that she had been in the Colston detachment. I haven't seen a lot of other claims that were that specific about how someone removed, but it means it's worth searching for your ancestor to see if they filed a claim and then reading through it to see if in fact it tells you exactly how they came to Indian Territory. And then there are a bunch of claims at the Library of Congress that I do not believe are digitized yet. They are, in essence, duplicates of claims that they filed elsewhere. And there are about 350 of them, I believe. So these have pages and pages of detail. They have supporting letters and lots of information that's really gives you a picture of your family prior to removal. This is actually the list of those claims. The Pioneer Papers, a lot of people don't think about the Pioneer Papers as being a source of Trail of Tears information. But in the early 1930s, when the WPA conducted these interviews, the children of people who had been on the Trail of Tears were still alive. So it was close to firsthand information. So this is for one of my granddad's sisters. And she said, you know, my mother came with her parents and that her father came when a young man and his parents did not come here. So that's all good information. And then she went into a good description of how her mother arrived, and they were a family that self-removed in 1837. And so she has this great description of their trip. Her mother actually got lost en route and found, or we wouldn't be here. So don't neglect the Pioneer Papers because they can be really helpful. And then, of course, the sort of list all these things that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Censuses, the accounts, and the journals. And again, all these books that include the various versions of the claims. And that is it.
Thank you.
So I doubt that there's anything that no one knew, but I hope there's maybe something of use there.
Well, actually, I don't think I was aware that there was part of the most annual detachment at the Fort Worth branch of the National Archives.
Yes, that piqued my interest too. I had never before heard of that. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I have seen, and I don't think I looked, and I don't have it bookmarked, but I have seen there's at least partial transcript out there someplace. Excuse me.
Hey, this is Billy Shotpouch. I'd like to ask a question about the 1860 census, the U.S. census that you referred to earlier.
Yep.
You mentioned that Indian families, maybe not all of them, but a good many were actually part of the U.S. Census in Indian Territory, and that you would look them up under like the section that contains the Black census, or did I understand that correctly?
Yes, the census can be hard to find because it's under Arkansas, and under Arkansas it says Indian lands. And then it was enumerated by the district, the tribe, and the district. So that's
okay. And where would I go to get access to that? What?
It's digitized on Ancestry, and it's the slave schedules. If your ancestors were slaveholders in Indian Territory in 1860, you should find them on that census. And it doesn't really.
Okay, so if they were not
them.
slaveholders.
If they're not slaveholders, if they are not slaveholders and everyone in the family was Indian, you will not find them on that census.
Okay, that rules.
If there was an intermarried white, the intermarried white person will be on the census. I have found a few Indian people there because generally because the father was white and the wife had died. And so the census taker often enumerated the children with their father, even though in fact the children were Cherokee or other Indian citizens. So.
Okay, yeah. So in my family, there weren't any intermarried whites until the 1890s. So I would assume that means I can't get anything from the 1860 census other than maybe to check people that I'm just interested in, but they're probably not my family.
Right, unless they were slaveholders.
Yeah.
They won't be that you won't be able to find them.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. You probably saved me from a big wild goose chase.
Oh, I
Well,
was
it's always interesting, as you say, just to look up other people, because, for example, my second great grandfather was there. But then his two sisters-in-law who were widowed and Indian, were on the same page of that census with them. So it can help you to confirm where locations, or if you're not sure when somebody died, it's another data point that can be helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know Michael Wren did a presentation for us on, kind of researching your community. So not necessarily just the names but if someone else is a witness to the claim, that's a name, because they obviously knew each other, and building it out that way has been really helpful, because if you can't find one name, but you find another, you knew they were community members. So yeah, instead of just looking for your one person, to widen it out a little bit more. That was very thorough. I love to see lists of everything all in one place. That was a lot of, I like good lists like that, where it's all fantastic.
Well, thank you. And as I say, I mean, that's people know who their Dawes ancestor was. And, maybe they knew their grandparents or their great grandparents, but when you get back into the 1800s, some families are really good at telling stories and some are terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did find at the Gilcrease, they had I believe it's a payment book of several of the detachments that they had digitized. It's not, they transcribed it. I don't think it got posted anywhere before they did their closure. But I have a copy of that, and it shows the detachment leaders who
So
rented horses, things like that. Yeah. So
yeah, so those are good, because you pick up 20 or 30 people, which is 20 or 30 people you didn't know about otherwise. So
exactly.
And I might talk at Reverend Walker's books, Cherokee Footprints. The Georgia chapter of the Trail of Tears Association should have those available for sale, because he left the rights to all of his books to the Georgia chapter of the Trail of Tears Association.
oh, that's great.
Are those in hardcover?
Yes.
Oh, I'd be real interested in them. Where would I go?
I'll email you, Billy, and give you a contact.
Okay, it's billyjackshotpouch@gmail.
Yep.
And it's always worth looking for books like that. I always look on Abe Books, and even on eBay, I have gotten Cherokee books on eBay at very reasonable prices. So keep an eye out for things like that there.
And Curtis is very good at tracking down books.
There was a set of those on eBay not long ago for, I think, $450.
Whew, I sure didn't pay that for them.
Yeah, that's pretty stiff, but I better know a little bit more about what's in them before I pay $400.
I don't think the Georgia chapter charges that much.
You can find them cheaper if you just look long enough.
Yeah.
All right.
And if I remember correctly, Reverend Walker gave me my copies.
Of course he did.
They were good for it.
Jack has a copy.
I'm sitting over in Claremore right now, so I might have to run over there and visit you and see what they look like.
So
I just wanted to make a comment about what Andy had mentioned about the payments. When I went through and put all those in an Excel file, the thing I was surprised the most about was how many people were paid in more than one detachment. They were paid, and it gives the dates. And so it was like they moved from one detachment to another at some point. For whatever reason, I don't know, but
That's where they would get sick and fall behind and join another detachment. And if you look at the list where it says, I think it says desertions, that's not really, they're not really deserting, they're transferring to another group.
Well, the other thing also, Becky's ancestor and mine were brothers and their family were Teamsters. They had a business hauling freight from Tennessee to Baltimore and back. That's, mostly what the family did. I mean, they farmed. So, and our, however many great grandfathers was a friend of John Ross. So they contracted to provide teams and wagons in the Taylor detachment. That was their uncle. So he provided 12 teams and wagons, and other people did the same thing. They contracted. So somebody might have provided wagons and teams for more than one detachment. So my great grandfather and his brother, as teenagers, drove those wagons to Oklahoma, to Indian Territory, over the Trail of Tears. And they were supposed to go and bring them back. And they only came home with one wagon. And so their father sued John Ross, and it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And long after he died, the court finally ruled in his favor to get payment for those wagons. So there's a Supreme Court case with our second great grandfather in it, which is also fascinating. But that's another reason you see the same names on the payment rolls, because people did in essence, rent their horses and wagons to more than one group.
So Kathy, the claims you said were at the Library of Congress. I've never heard about those before. What collection is that?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. They were, I think they were maybe the last board of claims, that's what they were connected with. The people were, this was their last ditch effort. I can look it up, Michael, and send it to you. But there is that list, and I have seen, I've gone down and looked at some of them and taken pictures of them for people. But they're really extensive, because people had 4 and 5 and 6 letters from people that, knew them, knew their land, knew what was taken. So they're really very detailed. My ancestor who's there, I was fascinated because he got a letter of support from Samuel Worcester. They were in jail together. And so there's actually a letter from Samuel Worcester in that file, which was a really neat thing to see.
Now, the picture that you showed looked like it was a copy, or someone had copied it from an original at a later date, because it did not look like the writing or the paper from that time period.
I think what I'm seeing are contemporaneous documents. I mean, they may be copies of, I don't know how many copies of these things were made. I mean, clearly there's some in Oklahoma, there's some in Tennessee, there's some at the archives. So there must have been duplicates out there.
Well, they got scattered after statehood, and then John Ross's grandchildren sold them to different places, which was the Cherokee National Archives, but there was no Cherokee Nation at the time, so they considered them their private family papers. So that's how they got scattered. But we are, like the 1838 claims, we did find all these other places that had them, and they were all willing for us to put them online. And it's the same with the 1842 claims. Although Mike knows there is an index to the 1842 claims at the National Archives, as Mike has pointed out. And so he's identified a couple of books that are missing that we can't locate. So, right, Mike?
Right. So when you find out what they are, keep your eyes open where you go.
Well, the list that I posted in the presentation, that's like, I don't know, a dozen boxes of claims in one set.
Yeah, that's fourth board claims.
I think so.
So Gilcrease has one book in the John Drew papers of the 1842 claims. And so they've just digitized that for us and did a fantastic job for us to put on our website. And the Western History Collection at the University of Oklahoma, they have one book and they just digitized that for us too. So we're getting lots of cooperation. And the Tennessee State Library and Archives, they've digitized all of the loose 1842 claims. Because all the other information we had, and Mary Bell, she had to use the microfilm to get theirs, and the microfilm is really bad on some of those books. So,
Right. Example, I showed the Polly Rattling Gourd claim that I found on the Tennessee website. So it will be really nice to have them in a single database, so you don't have to go searching all over the place.
and one of the books, which I believe was Delaware District, that was Book of Claims that was so bad on the microfilm. When Mike and I were at the State Library and Archives a month or so ago, then I did the entire book, although they are planning on digitizing all the bound copies for us, but it may take a while. It seems the people in authority there want all of the early governors of Tennessee papers digitized and codified ahead of our Cherokee records. And I just don't understand that. Why Tennessee would do that. But we are making progress with digitization. We can bring all of the Cherokee National Archives back together.
Well, that to me is the greatest hope for this new research center, is that will provide maybe we won't have all the documents in our possession, but it will be a central hub where you can find everything and see everything through them.
Yes.
It would make life a lot easier for all of us.
And I hope so too. And we'll.
Yeah, is that the goal of the new center?
Well, it's my goal. I'm on the board for it, so. So we
I mean,
shall,
how likely, how realistic is it that that's gonna happen?
which, getting the new,
Yeah, kind of getting everything centralized, not the originals, but
okay,
It's
I
virtual.
think we can do it. Because we've made tremendous progress. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have believed we could have had all these 1838 claims brought back together. in
right.
one place. And of course, they're so usable because of Mike Wren and his detailed index. And that's why with all of these entries of the neighborhoods and so forth, that you can search by that simply because Mike has put it in there. Because as I learned long ago, you can digitize the records, but it doesn't do a lot of good unless they're organized and indexed and so forth. So that's what Mike has done such a fantastic job for us. And he has the same for the 42 claims.
I'm going to have to sign off here. I have to be someplace else. I said I'm in two places at once today. So it's been wonderful meeting with you all.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
Join us
Wonderful to
each
meet
time.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd love to have you join us.
Yep, you're on our list now, so
I'm on the list now, so
Yep.
I may have to add one more group to my.
anytime.
Hey, well,
Thank
thanks again, Kathy.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay. So Mike, do you want to give an update on what we've been doing on the 42 claims?